Okay, so over the past couple of weeks, we have learned a lot about rational expressions. So, up to this point, you should be able to simplify rational expressions, add and subtract rational expressions, multiply and divide rational expressions, and then simplify complex fractions. So, today, we will learn how to solve rational equations. We will study two different techniques that we can apply depending upon the situation that we encounter when we're solving. So let's consider two rational equations and discuss possible techniques for solving each type. So let's look at the first one. First one that we might encounter is a proportion. So in a proportion, each side of the equation is a rational expression. So if we look, grab the highlighter real quick. This right here is an example of a rational equation that is a proportion. So the technique that we're going to use to solve something like this is cross multiplication. And you've probably seen this technique before. I don't know if you've used it in a setting exactly like this, but it should look pretty familiar to you. Second scenario that we might run into, okay, a rational equation that's not a proportion. All right, and then this is an example right here of a rational equation that is not a proportion. So the technique that we're going to use is we're going to multiply each side of the equation by the least common denominator of each rational expression. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to jump in and we're going to do each of these examples. So I'm going to do example one, which is solving a rational equation that is a proportion. We use cross multiplication to solve that. And then the second example that we'll look at is a rational equation that is not a proportion. And we'll talk about the technique that we're going to use to solve that. So let's jump down to example number one. All right, so we're asked to solve 3 over x plus 1 equals 9 over 4x plus 5, and then we're asked to check our solution or our solution. So we'll go ahead and do that right now. So I'm just going to rewrite the equation really quickly. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. Cross multiplication involves taking the product of the numerator of the first fraction and multiplying that by the denominator of the second fraction. So here we're going to multiply 3 times 4x plus 5. So this is 3 times the quantity 4x plus 5. And that's going to equal, I'm just going to grab a different color pen real quick, 9 times x plus 1. All right, so now we have a relatively simple equation to solve here. We have a couple different options that we can take here. If you look, 3 and 9 share a common factor, so we could divide both sides by 3 in this case. What I'm going to do right now is the technique that you're probably going to use more than likely, and that is using the distributive property to simplify each side of the equation. So I'm going to do that here. So we're going to get 12x plus 15 by distributing the 3, and then 9x plus 9. So again, this gives us a relatively simple equation to solve. I'm going to rewrite it up here. So now we just want to collect all the terms that contain variables on one side, all the constant expressions on the other side. So I'm going to subtract 9x from both sides. And I'll also subtract 15 from both sides. We'll do that in one step. And that's going to give us 3x equals negative 6. And to finish up this equation, divide both sides by 3, and we're going to get x equals negative 2. Okay, so this is our potential solution here. And what we want to do quickly is just check to make sure that that is actually a correct or the correct solution. So we're going to do that off to the side here. So I'm going to replace x with negative 2 anywhere I see that in the original equation. And that becomes 9 over 4 times negative 2 plus 5. So negative 2 plus 1 in the denominator here is negative 1. So it's 3 over negative 1, which gives us negative 3. Here we have 9 over 4 times negative 2 is negative 8 plus 5, that's negative 3. And then 9 divided by negative 3 is negative 3. So this one checks out perfectly. So that's how you would use cross multiplication to solve a proportion. The next example that we're going to look at is not a proportion. So we're going to talk about how we will solve that equation right now. So the equation that we have is 1 minus 8 over x minus 5 equals 3 over x. So again, I'm going to rewrite that. Okay, and again, we can't use cross multiplication here because that's not a proportion. We have this additional term, just a 1 kind of kicking around over here. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to cross multiply in this situation. So here is what we are going to do instead. What we're going to try to do is find the least common denominator of all of those rational expressions. So the first rational expression we see is 1 over 1. So the denominator there is 1, which is nice and easy for us. Second expression that we see is x minus 5 in the denominator. And the third expression that we see is an x in the denominator. So the least common denominator in this case should be 1 times x minus 5 times x. So it's just x times x minus 5. All right, now what we're going to do next is we are going to multiply both sides of this equation by the common denominator. So I'm going to multiply this times x minus 5. And I'm going to do that to both sides of the equation. I kind of ran out of room here, so I'm just going to kind of distribute across. So we're going to multiply times that, and times that. All right, so 1 times x minus 5 is just x times x minus 5. Now I'm going to be pretty explicit in the next couple steps here. So the next one is minus 8 times x minus 5 all over x minus 5. And then on the right-hand side of that equation, we get 3 times x minus 5 all over x. All right, so what we start to see is that nice things start happening, and this equation starts to simplify down. It looks really messy right now, but things are going to, again, improve dramatically in just a minute. So this first expression, I'm just going to multiply that out. I'm going to get x squared minus 5x. That's just distributing. Next one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to see if there's any common factors shared in the numerator and the denominator. So in this case, if we look, we have an x minus 5 in the denominator and an x minus 5 in the numerator. So those will divide out, and we'll just be left with minus 8x. So again, the left-hand side really cleans up pretty nicely. Right-hand side, again, we have a common factor of x in the numerator and the denominator, so that will divide out, and then we'll be left with 3 times x minus 5, and we'll distribute that in just a second. So let's clean up the left side. X squared, can't combine that with any other terms. Negative 5x and negative 8x. We combine those terms, we get negative 13x. Right-hand side, distribute the 3, and we get 3x minus 15. All right, so we're getting there. So now we see that we have a quadratic equation potentially on our hands here. And with quadratics, what we want to do is we want to move all the terms to one side of the equation, set that equal to 0, and then see if we can factor or use the quadratic formula to solve. So let's move our terms over. X squared minus 13x. I'm going to subtract a 3x from both sides and add 15 to both sides. So minus 3x plus 15 equals 0. All right, and again, those middle terms will combine to give us x squared minus 16x plus 15 equal to 0. And now we're going to try and factor this. And I think this will factor nicely. It looks like we're going to get x. So we need two factors of 15 that add up to negative 16. So it looks like it's going to be negative 15 and negative 1. So when we set each of those factors equal to 0, we should get x equals 15 or x equals 1. All right. So now we should go back and check those solutions. I've actually done the check out on the handwritten notes that I've posted to Google Classroom, so you can see that check on there. These answers do check out. But again, it's crucial that you check your solutions, and you're going to see why that's the case in one of the upcoming videos. All right, so I hope this was helpful. I'm going to go through two more examples, so there'll be two more videos that follow this. Another example of using cross multiplication, and another example where you have to multiply both sides of the equation by a common denominator. All right, so I will see you in the next couple videos.